everyone, in this video we're going to be discussing about plant tissues. And now in a previous video we've learned about the meristematic tissues. The meristematic tissues are the tissues that are undergoing constant cell division and contributing towards the growth of the plant. So we learned that there are three types of meristematic tissues. We've learned about the apical meristem and the lateral meristem and the intercalary meristem. And then we learned that the opposite of meristematic tissues are the permanent tissues. And with regard to the permanent tissues, we've learned that there are actually two types of permanent tissues. The simple permanent, which we learned about in the previous video. And now we are coming to the complex permanent tissues. All right. Now, I explained what complex permanent tissues are in the previous video. The complex permanent tissues are basically the tissues that are made up of many different types of cells. So in our syllabus, we have to learn about two complex permanent tissues, the xylem tissue and the phloem tissue. All right. So when I say xylem tissue and phloem tissue, what exactly do these two tissues do in a plant? So I'm going to make a quick drawing here of a plant. So here's our plant. All right. So here are our leaves and the roots. All right. So now if you take a plant, the plant needs water, right? And there's water underground in the soil. So what happens in a plant is the roots of the plant absorb this water. And once the root absorbs water, it needs to transport throughout to the rest of the plant, right? So to transport the water and the mineral ions up the plant, there is a special tissue for this function, which is called the xylem tissue, right? So the function of the xylem tissue is to transport water and minerals up the plant, all right? And similar to transporting water, you know that a plant also produces food, right? Inside the leaves during photosynthesis, the plant produces food. So when a plant produces food, this food too needs to be transported to different parts of the plant. So the transportation of food takes place through the phloem tissue. So the phloem tissue, the function of it is to transport food. And food is typically transported as sucrose. All right. So these are the two differences between the xylem and the phloem tissue. There are two different tissues in a plant. The xylem tissue's function is to transport water and minerals, and the phloem tissue's function is to transport food or sucrose, right? But when we talk about the xylem tissue, this is the first primary function of the xylem tissue. But in addition to this, the xylem tissue also is very strong, so it provides support to the plant. All right. Now, when we talk about the xylem tissue, so let's start with the xylem tissue. Now, I mentioned earlier how this is called a complex permanent tissue. And the reason why it's called complex is because this xylem tissue, the tissue has different types of cells within it. There are actually 4 different types of cells within a xylem tissue. All right. So let's first talk about the first and the most important cell in the xylem tissue. These are the xylem vessel elements. Now, what are xylem vessel elements? They are one of the 4 types of cells found in the xylem tissue. And a xylem vessel element, this is what it looks like. So it's basically like, it's a cell, right? So it's just like a normal cell, just like any other cell. Okay, it has a shape like this. Not exactly like this, but I'm going to start off like this. This is what the xylem vessel looks like. But the inside of the cell is completely empty. It's completely hollow inside the cell. There's nothing inside the xylem vessel element, okay? And if you take the cell wall of the xylem vessel element also has that very hard substance called lignin, okay? So that is one unique feature of the xylem vessel element, the fact that the inside of the cell is completely empty. There's no nucleus, there's no cytoplasm, there's not a single organelle inside it. And the most important feature of the xylem vessel element is the fact that now you see this top part of the cell wall and the bottom part of the cell wall, the top and bottom end walls are absent in the xylem vessel. So basically, the cell basically doesn't have this top and bottom cell wall. The cell simply looks like this with only the side walls present. The top and the bottom walls are completely absent. And you might wonder why this cell looks like this with the cell walls only to the side and not at the top or bottom. This is because that when we have many xylem vessel elements and if all of them stack up over one another, so this is my second xylem vessel element that I'm drawing, stacking up. This is actually under my first vessel element. And let's imagine another xylem vessel element stacking over this xylem vessel element. Can you see the fact that the cross wall is absent? Now see, when the cross wall is absent, if there was a cross wall, it would be here like this, right? But the fact that the cross wall is absent ensures that there's a continuous column inside all of these xylem vessels. So there's a continuous space inside these xylem vessels, and through this space, the water can flow up the plant. So you see these unique features of the xylem vessel element, the fact that it was hollow inside, the fact that there was nothing inside the xylem vessels, and also the fact that the top and bottom cross walls are absent. These adaptations are to facilitate the transport of water up the plant. So this is the first type of cell that we find in the xylem tissue. And in addition to this cell, there's also another cell called the tracheids. The second type of cells are called the tracheids. These are long cells which are found associated with the xylem vessel elements. And these cells have pits in them. And these cells can also help to transport water up the plant. So these cells are also helping in the transport of water up the plant. All right, so you get water transporting up these cells as well. So that's the second type of cell found in the xylem tissue. And then the third type of cell found in the xylem tissue is the xylem parenchyma. So in the xylem tissue, there are some parenchyma cells scattered about as well. These parenchyma cells are there for food storage. These parenchyma cells are there for food storage. And finally, the fourth type of cell found in the xylem tissue are the xylem fibers. So fibers are the long sclerenchyma tissues, and these xylem fibers provide support to this xylem tissue. All right. So these are the four types of cells that are found in the xylem tissue. They are the xylem vessel elements, the tracheids, the xylem parenchyma, and the xylem fibers. Let's just refresh our memory on the xylem vessel elements and the tracheids. The xylem vessel elements helped in the transportation of water. And the tracheids also did the same thing. They help in the transportation of water. And you need to know the unique adaptations of the xylem vessel elements. What were the unique things we learned about it? We learned that the xylem vessel elements had no cross walls. So cross walls are absent so that they had a continuous column for the water to flow up. And also the fact that the xylem vessel elements were dead cells with no cytoplasm or organelles inside it. All right, so this is what you need to know about the xylem tissue. All right, and then we come to the next type of tissue, which is the phloem tissue. Now, the phloem tissue is also a little similar in some ways to the xylem tissue. This too has 4 types of cells in it, and that's why we call it a complex permanent tissue, because there are 4 different types of cells in this tissue. So let's see what these different types of cells are. Now, if you take the phloem tissue, the main type of cells in this tissue are the sieve tube elements. Now, what are sieve tube elements? They are basically cells. Okay, this is what a normal plant cell looks like, right? They're cells just like this. But if you take the top and bottom walls, now in the xylem, the top and bottom walls were completely absent. But in the phloem tissue, the top and bottom walls have holes on them. They have holes on them, they have pores on them, which kind of makes them resemble a sieve. And that is exactly why they're called sieve tube elements. So just imagine, let's say that this sieve tube element is stacked up over another sieve tube element. Now, the fact that there are pores on the top and bottom cross wall, okay, there are these pores, and I told you this resembles a sieve, right? So we call this part the sieve plate. The fact that they have the sieve plate here ensures that if there is food to be transported, let's say that there is food to be transported, there's a column, there's a continuity through which the food molecules can pass through these phloem sieve tube elements. All right, so that's the first feature of the sieve tube elements. And next, there are these other cells called the companion cells. All right, so about the companion cells are these little cells besides the sieve tube elements. So now if we consider the sieve tube elements, these cells too do not have a nucleus, right? But they have these companion cells on their side, and companion cells, as their name suggests, they kind of help out the sieve tube elements. You see, these companion cells have a nucleus of their own, and through this nucleus, it controls the activities of the companion cell itself, as well as the nucleus controls the activity of the adjacent sieve tube elements. So companion cells are the ones that are kind of assisting the sieve tube elements. And then in addition to the sieve tube elements and the companion cells, the phloem tissue, just like the xylem tissue, has phloem parenchyma and phloem fibers. All right, and just like in the xylem tissue, the function of the phloem parenchyma is to store food, and the function of the phloem fibers is to provide support. All right, so that's what you need to know about the phloem tissue, and that brings us to the end of this topic on complex permanent tissue. So I hope all of you got a good understanding on this.